Targeted and hostile, 98% white Cedar Ridge, black twins Zara and Malik face escalating racist terror, slurs, assaults, KKK threats spray-painted on their locker. Grieving their father killed after a traffic stop, they silently endure, holding on to his lessons. But their tormentors made a critical mistake. They targeted victims unaware they are disciplined black belt fighters. Cornered after practice, fists flying, their hidden power explodes in a stunning defense that shatters the town's silence. Witness the reckoning. Cedar Ridge, Ohio. The name itself sounded clean, sturdy, deceptively simple. Like freshly sawn timber stacked neat and high. But for Zara and Malik Johnson, 16 years old and breathing Ohio air for the first time that smelled unervingly of manure and damp earth instead of Detroit exhaust and rain-slicked asphalt, the name felt like a shroud. The welcome sign, stark white against the late summer green, proclaimed a population of 4,312 and, beneath it, almost as an afterthought, a great place to raise a family. It didn't mention the other statistic, the one Imani, their mother, had found online, the one that felt like a physical weight pressing down on them, 98% white. Walking the halls of Cedar Ridge High was like navigating a landscape painted in shades of beige and curious stares. Zara kept her gaze fixed ahead, her long braids swaying rhythmically against her backpack, a practiced mask of indifference honed over years. Malik walked beside her, his lanky frame seemingly relaxed, but his eyes, dark and sharp, missed nothing. He carried his sketchbook like a shield, its worn cover a familiar comfort in this alien territory. They were anomalies. Twin constellations dropped into a sky that only knew solitary stars. Their blackness wasn't just visible, it felt amplified, scrutinized under the fluorescent lights and the weight of hundreds of pairs of eyes that either slid away too quickly or lingered too long. Whispers followed them like static cling. Detroit, hissed with the cadence of a curse word, affirmative action, muttered behind cupped hands, look at their hair, followed by stifled giggles. It was the third day when the first tangible missile struck. A crumpled ball of notebook paper bounced off the back of Zara's head during American history. She didn't flinch, didn't turn. Years of discipline, drilled into muscle memory by their father, held her steady. Malik, sitting one row over, saw it happen. Saw the smirking faces of Jake Henderson and Derek Peterson 2 rows behind Zara. Jake, quarterback handsome with eyes the color of faded denim and an air of inherited arrogance. Derek, his shadow, shorter, stockier, with a face perpetually flushed with either exertion or resentment. Sons of local elites, Jake's father owned the largest construction company in the county, Derek's was the sheriff. They moved through the school like they owned the linoleum tiles beneath their expensive sneakers. Later, Zara smoothed the paper flat in the relative privacy of a bathroom stall. 5 words scrawled in jagged print, go back to Detroit. She folded it precisely, tucking it into her pocket. Evidence. Or maybe just a reminder. Lunchtime in the cafeteria was a fresh gauntlet. They found an empty table near the back, the roar of conversation and clatter of trays washing over them. Malik opened his sketchbook, pencil flying across the page, capturing the curve of a stressed ceiling beam, the way light caught a discarded plastic fork. It was his way of mapping the world, finding order in chaos. Whatcha drawn, city boy? Jake's voice sliced through the din. He loomed over their table, Derek flanking him, identical smirks plastered on their faces. A small knot of their friends hovered nearby, a waiting audience. Malik didn't look up immediately. He finished shading a section, his knuckles white around the pencil. Just sketching. Derek leaned in, snatching the book before Malik could react. He flipped through the pages, exaggeratedly mimicking awe. Ooh, looky here. Angry lines. Dark clouds. Must be Detroit weather following you. He stopped at a half-finished portrait of their mother, her face rendered with loving detail. With a thick black marker pilfered from someone's backpack, Derek scrawled a crude racial slur across Imani's cheek. Something cold and sharp pierced through Malik's practiced calm. He stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. The noise level in the cafeteria dipped as nearby students sensed the shift. Zara was on her feet beside him, her body tense, coiled. Give it back, Malik said, his voice dangerously low. Jake laughed, a short, barking sound. Or what? Gonna call your homies? Derek tossed the sketchbook onto the table, the marker bleeding through the page onto the drawing beneath. Keep your ghetto art to yourself. They swaggered away, their posse trailing, leaving a ripple of unease and averted eyes in their wake. Malik picked up the sketchbook, his fingers tracing the ugly black lines marring his mother's face. Zara put a hand on his arm, her touch firm, grounding. Their eyes met, a silent communication forged over 16 years of shared existence, shared grief, shared strength. Not now. Not yet. They didn't speak as they cleaned up the defaced page as best they could. They didn't speak as they walked home under the too bright Ohio sun, the silence stretching between them, thick with unspoken fury. Their stoicism wasn't apathy, it was containment. A dam holding back a flood painstakingly built over years of training, loss, and the harsh lessons of survival. That night, in the small, sparsely furnished house they rented on the edge of town, the smell of sage filled the air. In their shared bedroom, they lit 3 candles on a makeshift altar, a small, polished wooden box that held their father's dog tags, a worn leather-bound copy of The Art of War, and a framed photograph. The photo showed a smiling man, younger, vibrant, his arms wrapped around 2 small children with gap-toothed grins, Zara and Malik, maybe 6 years old. David Johnson. Master martial artist. Father. Victim. They bowed their heads, the candlelight flickering across their faces, casting long shadows on the wall. The ritual was their anchor, a connection to the man who had shaped their lives and whose absence was a constant ache. His voice echoed in their minds, a mantra learned through sweat and repetition in their basement dojo back in Detroit: control your breath, control your mind. Never strike first, but always, always strike true. Your strength is not for show, not for ego. It's for defense. Of yourself, of what's right. Tonight, the words felt heavier, the discipline harder to maintain. The shadows in Cedar Ridge weren't just in the corners of their room, they were clinging to their skin, trying to seep into their bones. But beneath the surface calm, a different kind of fire smoldered. Not the wild, destructive fire of uncontrolled rage, but the focused, intense heat of a forge, waiting. Waiting for the right moment to strike true. Detroit, Michigan, 2018. The air in the basement dojo hung thick with the smell of sweat, old canvas, and something vaguely metallic, like determination itself. 10-year-old Zara and Malik stood facing each other, fists wrapped in faded red fabric, mimicking the movements of their father, David. He moved with a fluid grace that seemed almost impossible for his solid frame, each block, each strike executed with pinpoint precision and an underlying current of power. Focus, Zara, David's voice was gentle but firm. Your stance is too wide. Leaves you open. Zara adjusted, her small face screwed up in concentration. Malik, ever the observer, watched his sister, then his father, mirroring the correction almost instantly. Good, Malik. Anticipation. See the opening before it exists. David clapped his hands together. Again. 5 more minutes, then homework. This basement was their sanctuary. Concrete floor covered partially by worn tatami mats, walls lined with photos of martial arts masters, a heavy bag swaying gently in the corner, weapons racks holding bow staffs and nunchaku polished smooth by years of use. It was here David Johnson poured his legacy into his children. Not just the physical techniques of karate and aikido, but the philosophy behind them: discipline, respect, restraint, and the unwavering knowledge of when and how to defend oneself. Their training wasn't about aggression, it was about channeling it. David knew the world his black children would inherit. He'd faced it himself, the subtle slights, the overt threats, the constant need to be twice as good, twice as careful. He wanted them to have tools, not just physical, but mental and spiritual, to navigate it. Their mother, Imani, would often watch from the doorway, a book in her lap, a soft smile playing on her lips as her children moved through their katas. But sometimes, a shadow would cross her face, a flicker of worry that tightened her expression. It was later that year, after David was gone, that the shadow fully consumed her features. The official story was a traffic stop gone wrong. Failure to signal a lane change. Escalation. Resisting arrest. Fatal force. The words were clinical, sterile, masking a brutal reality. One evening, Curled up on the worn living room sofa, the silence heavy between them, Imani finally told them more. Her voice was a low whisper, thick with unshed tears. They pulled him over 5 blocks from home. Said he matched a description. Your father, he just asked why. Calmly. He knew the drill. But they saw his size, his skin, and they heard aggression. She squeezed her eyes shut. They called him aggressive for asking a question. For asserting his right to know why his liberty was being challenged. He never even got a chance to show them his license. The injustice hung in the air, suffocating. It wasn't an abstract concept anymore. It had a name, a face, a gaping hole in their lives. Their training took on a new urgency after that. The basement dojo became not just a place of learning, but a crucible. Every bead of sweat, every aching muscle, every perfectly executed block felt like an act of defiance, a tribute to the father whose life was stolen because his very presence was deemed a threat. They tested for their junior black belts at 14, younger than most. The testing was grueling, hours of katas, sparring, board breaking, and philosophical questioning. Their father's photo, propped up on a nearby table, seemed to watch them, his smiling eyes urging them on. When the sensei tied the black belts around their waists, the fabric stiff and new, it felt less like an achievement and more like an inheritance. A responsibility. Life in Detroit continued, marked by their father's absence and the slow creep of changes they didn't fully understand at first. Their neighborhood, once a vibrant tapestry of black families and businesses, began to shift. Sleek new coffee shops replaced old diners. Condos sprouted where corner stores used to be. Rents climbed steadily, relentlessly. Gentrification wasn't just a word in a newspaper article, it was the force pushing familiar faces out, painting over murals, silencing the specific rhythm of their streets. Imani, a skilled nurse, worked double shifts, but the rising tide threatened to swamp them. The final blow came when their landlord sold the building, the new owner doubling the rent overnight. Cedar Ridge, Ohio, materialized as a lifeline, a nursing job offer for Imani with a higher salary and, crucially, affordable housing. It was a chance to start over, to escape the economic vice squeezing them out of their home. Packing up the house was like packing away pieces of their father. The basement dojo was the hardest. Rolling up the worn mats, dismantling the weapons racks, it felt like another kind of loss. The night before they left Detroit, Imani sat with them in the nearly empty living room, boxes casting long shadows. Cedar Ridge will be different, she said, choosing her words carefully. People might not understand you. They might fear you, just for looking the way you do. Remember everything your father taught you. She met their eyes, her gaze intense. Your strength, your discipline, it's a language they won't expect. Use it wisely. Don't let anyone provoke you into throwing away your future. But don't let anyone mistake your restraint for weakness, either. Know when to stand your ground. She reached out, taking one of Zara's hands and one of Malik's. You carry your father's spirit. Let it guide you. Protect each other. Always. As they drove away from the familiar skyline of Detroit, leaving behind the ghosts and the memories, the weight of Imani's words settled upon them. Their black belts weren't just symbols of skill, they were shields forged in grief, discipline honed by injustice, a silent promise to survive. Cedar Ridge awaited, an unknown territory where their carefully cultivated restraint would be tested in ways they couldn't yet imagine. The roots of their resistance, planted in the basement dojo of Detroit, ran deep. They would need every inch of that depth to weather the coming storm. The parking lot at Cedar Ridge High shimmered under the afternoon sun, asphalt radiating heat waves. Malik walked towards their aging sedan, the weight of the school day settling on his shoulders. He fumbled for his keys, anxious for the relative peace of home, the quiet rhythm of sketching, the familiar weight of a bow staff in his hands. A roar of an engine broke the relative quiet. Jake Henderson's oversized pickup truck, gleaming cherry red and jacked up on ridiculously large tires, screeched to a halt, blocking Malik's path to the car door. Jake leaned out the window, sunglasses perched on his nose, a lazy smirk playing on his lips. Derek Peterson hopped out of the passenger side, slamming the door with unnecessary force. Going somewhere, city boy? Jake drawled, engine still rumbling like a caged beast. Malik ignored him, trying to edge around the front of the truck. Derek stepped deliberately into his path, shoving him hard against the hot metal of a nearby locker bay used for athletic equipment. The impact jarred Malik's teeth, sending his backpack slipping off one shoulder. "I asked you a question," Derek spat, his face inches from Malik's. His breath smelled faintly of chewing tobacco. Malik met his gaze, refusing to show the flicker of fear that licked at the edges of his control. He could feel the familiar centering calm descending, the automatic assessment of angles, weight distribution, potential targets. Easy takedown. Wrist lock, pressure point. His father's voice echoed, "Never strike first. Leave him alone, Derek." Zara's voice cut through the tension. She strode towards them, her expression thunderous, her fists clenched at her sides. She'd been waiting near the school entrance and had seen the confrontation unfold. Jake chuckled from the truck. "Look, his sister's here to save him." Derek didn't take his eyes off Malik. "Think you're tough, huh? Think you belong here?" He shoved Malik again, harder this time. Zara took another step forward, her body radiating protective fury. Malik caught her eye, giving the slightest shake of his head. "Not yet. Not like this." It was a calculated risk, baiting them in front of witnesses, but not the right witnesses, not the right time. Escalating here, outnumbered, would only feed their narrative. Reluctantly, Zara stopped, her jaw tight. Malik slowly straightened up, picking up his backpack. He looked from Derek to Jake, his voice steady. "We don't want any trouble." "Trouble seems to follow you people," Jake sneered, finally cutting the engine. He and Derek shared a look, a silent, ugly understanding passing between them. Then, as quickly as they appeared, they climbed back into the truck and peeled out of the parking lot, leaving behind a plume of exhaust and the heavy silence of Malik's swallowed rage. The incident was a turning point. The subtle hostility curdled into something more overt, more menacing. Whispers grew louder. Shoulders bumped them in the hallways with deliberate force. Notes filled with slurs appeared taped to their locker. They reported the initial incidents, the crumpled paper, the defaced sketchbook, to the guidance counselor, who offered sympathetic noises but little action. When they reported the parking lot confrontation, they were directed to Vice Principal Thompson. Mr. Thompson, a man whose bland features seemed permanently fixed in an expression of mild impatience, listened with his arms crossed, tapping a pen on his desk. "Boys will be boys," he concluded, peering at them over his glasses. "Jake and Derek are spirited. Good families. Probably just some hazing, new kid stuff. Try not to be so sensitive. Maybe try fitting in a little more." He waved a dismissive hand. "Teen drama. It'll blow over, blow over." The words hung in the air like poison gas. Their experiences, their fear, their dignity, reduced to teen drama. Ms. Alvarez, their history teacher, overheard part of the exchange as they left Thompson's office, her expression tight with anger. She was one of the few non-white staff members, a sharp, passionate woman with roots in Texas whose family had faced generations of discrimination. "Don't let him diminish what's happening," she told them quietly in the hallway later, her dark eyes flashing. "This isn't just drama. It's hate. I've seen it before. Document everything. Dates, times, witnesses, what was said, what was done. Keep a record. If the school won't act, maybe someone else will." She offered them resources, contact information for civil rights groups, a listening ear. Her solidarity was a small island in a sea of indifference, but it mattered. The breaking point came a few days later. They arrived at school early for a study session with Ms. Alvarez before classes started. As they approached their shared locker down a relatively deserted hallway, the acrid smell of spray paint hit them first. Then they saw it. Scrawled across the dented blue metal in stark white paint were 3 letters, KKK. Zara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Malik stared, a cold dread washing over him, colder even than the anger. This wasn't just bullying anymore. This was a symbol, a historical weight, a threat that resonated with generations of terror. It felt like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. Ms. Alvarez found them there, frozen, staring at the hateful graffiti. Her face paled, then hardened with fury. She immediately took photos with her phone, her hands shaking slightly. She marched them straight back to the principal's office, bypassing the vice principal entirely. Principal Hayes, confronted with the photographic evidence and Ms. Alvarez's barely contained outrage, looked uncomfortable. He mumbled apologies, promised an investigation, assured them this was not representative of Cedar Ridge High. He had the maintenance crew paint over the locker immediately, effectively erasing the evidence before anyone else could see it. The investigation, predictably, turned up nothing. No witnesses. No security cameras in that particular hallway. Case closed. That night, the fragile dam of their restraint began to crack. The injustice of it all, the constant harassment, the dismissive adults, the blatant symbol of hate scrubbed away as if it never happened, churned within them. They practiced katas in the small living room, their movements sharp, precise, fueled by a righteous anger that demanded release. The final straw came later that week. They emerged from a late-night study session at the library to find the tires on their mother's old sedan slashed. All four of them. Flat, useless, sagging reminders of their vulnerability. Zara stared at the damage, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from a fury so profound it felt like electricity humming beneath her skin. Years of discipline, of holding back, of swallowing insults and indignities, threatened to shatter. She wanted to scream, to hit something, to unleash the power coiled within her. Malik put a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm, grounding her. He looked at the slashed tires, then at the dark, quiet street. His eyes were hard, glittering with resolve. "Not like this, Zara," he said, his voice low and intense. "They want us to react wildly. To prove their narrative. We wait. We choose the time, the place." He met her gaze, his own fury mirroring hers, but tempered with strategy. "We wait for the right moment. And then, we strike true." The breaking point had been reached. The foundations of their control were stressed to the limit. But they held. Not out of weakness, but out of a deeper strength. A strength that understood the power of timing, the importance of choosing their ground, the necessity of making their stand count. The reckoning was coming. Dusk painted the Cedar Ridge sky in bruised shades of purple and orange. The sharp scent of cut grass hung heavy in the cooling air around the football field. Lights hummed overhead, casting long, distorted shadows. Zara and Malik walked slowly across the field, shoulder bags slung across their chests, heading towards the parking lot after a voluntary weekend practice session they'd started, katas and conditioning under the open sky, reclaiming a small piece of territory as their own. They heard the footsteps behind them first, too many, too heavy to be casual. They turned, not surprised, but wary. Jake Henderson stood there, flanked by Derek Peterson and 4 other members of the football team, faces Malik recognized from the hallways, faces that had smirked and sneered in Jake's wake. 6 of them. Blocking their path to the gate. The casual arrogance was gone from Jake's face, replaced by a tight, angry set to his jaw. Derek looked wired, bouncing slightly on the balls of his feet. "Thought you could just ignore us?" Jake's voice was tight. "Thought that KKK thing would scare you off?" "Leave us alone, Jake," Zara said, her voice calm, level. Years of training kicked in, assessing the threat, the environment, the exits. 6 opponents. Open space. Hard ground. "Not gonna happen," Derek snarled, stepping forward. "This is our town. Our school. You don't belong here." "We belong wherever we choose to be," Malik stated, his stance shifting subtly, feet shoulder-width apart, weight balanced. He met Jake's eyes directly. "Move." That single word, quiet but absolute, seemed to snap something in Jake. With a guttural yell, he lunged, swinging a wild right hook aimed at Malik's head. Time seemed to slow. For the Bullies, it was a sudden explosion of violence. For the twins, it was a familiar dance. Malik didn't block. He didn't retreat. He dropped, pivoting on the ball of his left foot, the punch whistling harmlessly over his head. As Jake stumbled forward, off balance from the force of his own missed blow, Malik swept his right leg out in a low, controlled arc, connecting solidly with Jake's ankles. The quarterback went down hard, landing flat on his back with a grunt that knocked the wind out of him. Simultaneously, Derek, seeing Jake go down, surged towards Zara, pulling something metallic from his pocket. Sunlight glinted briefly off a small pocket knife blade. He slashed wildly, aiming low. Zara moved like lightning. She parried the knife hand with her left forearm, deflecting the blade away from her body. Her right hand snaked out, clamping onto Derek's wrist in an iron grip. Twisting sharply, applying pressure to the joint, she executed a perfect kotegaeshi, a textbook Aikido wristlock. Derek cried out in pain and surprise as his wrist bent at an unnatural angle, the knife clattering harmlessly onto the grass. Before he could react, Zara spun him around, using his own momentum against him, driving him face first onto the turf and pinning him there with a knee pressed firmly into his back, her hands still controlling his wrist. It had taken less than 5 seconds. The other 4 boys froze, their aggressive postures dissolving into stunned disbelief. They'd expected an easy intimidation, maybe a scuffle, a chance to put the Detroit twins in their place. They hadn't expected this. This sudden, shocking display of controlled, efficient power. Zara looked up from the pinned, groaning Derek, her eyes sweeping over the remaining 4. Who's next? Her voice snapped like a whip in the sudden silence, devoid of fear, filled only with cold command. No one moved. Their bravado evaporated, replaced by wide eyes and slack jaws. From the edges of the field, drawn by the initial shouts and the sounds of the brief struggle, a crowd was gathering. Other students leaving late practices, parents waiting for pickups. Phones were already out, small red lights blinking, recording. Jake scrambled to his feet, his face flushed crimson with humiliation and rage. He ignored the pain radiating from his back, his pride wounded far more deeply. You bitch, he roared, launching himself at Zara, fueled by pure, blind fury. This time, Zara didn't wait for him to close the distance. She pivoted smoothly, her body a whirlwind of controlled energy. Her right leg snapped up and out in a blindingly fast roundhouse kick. The air crackled with the speed of it. But the kick stopped, suddenly, perfectly, the sole of her sneaker hovering less than an inch from Jake's nose. He froze mid-lunge, eyes wide with terror, staring at the shoe that could have shattered his face. He could feel the displaced air, smell the rubber sole. Silence descended again, thick and absolute. Every eye was on them. Every phone recording. Zara held the kick for a heartbeat, her leg trembling slightly with the immense control required. Then she lowered it slowly, deliberately. Malik stepped forward, standing beside his sister, his eyes locking onto Jake's, then sweeping across the other stunned bullies. His voice was low, resonant, carrying across the field, each word landing like a hammer blow. This is the first and final warning. His gaze was flinty, unwavering. You defaced our property. You assaulted us. You threatened us with symbols of hate. You brought a weapon. He gestured towards the fallen knife near Derek, who was still pinned and whimpering under Zara's knee. We defended ourselves. That's all. But touch us again, Malik's voice dropped further, becoming a dangerous growl. Touch our property, speak to us like that again, and we won't miss. He let the threat hang in the air, heavy and undeniable. The authority in his voice, the sheer confidence radiating from both twins, was more intimidating than any physical blow. Zara slowly released Derek, pushing him away contemptuously. He scrambled backwards on the grass, clutching his wrist, avoiding everyone's eyes. Jake stood rooted to the spot, breathing heavily, the image of Zara's foot stopping inches from his face seared into his mind. The other boys backed away slowly, melting into the gathering crowd, eager to disappear. The twins stood their ground for another moment, surveying the scene, the defeated bullies, the stunned onlookers, the ubiquitous glowing screens of the phones capturing it all. Then, without another word, they turned, picked up their bags, and walked calmly, deliberately, towards the parking lot gate, leaving behind a tableau of shock, fear, and the undeniable evidence of their power. By the time they reached their car, Malik's phone was already buzzing. A friend from the track team. Dude. Did you see Twitter? #Cedar Ridge fight. Within hours, the videos were everywhere. Cropped, Shaky footage from multiple angles, shared, retweeted, commented on, going viral with astonishing speed. The initial captions were sensationalist, epic beatdown at Cedar Ridge High. But as more context emerged, fueled by anonymous comments presumably from students who had witnessed the weeks of harassment, the narrative shifted. Racist bullies get schooled by victims. Black belt twins shut down racist attack. Self-defense, not aggression in Ohio high school. The reckoning hadn't just happened on the football field. It was exploding online, igniting a firestorm that Cedar Ridge High, and the town itself, could no longer dismiss as teen drama. The twins' controlled fury, their unexpected skill, their clear articulation of self-defense had struck a chord far beyond the manicured lawns of their hostile new home. They hadn't struck first, but they had struck true. And the echoes were just beginning. 1 month later, the Cedar Ridge High Gymnasium buzzed with an energy it usually reserved for championship basketball games. Tonight, however, the bleachers were filled not just with students and parents, but with reporters angling microphones, activists holding hastily made signs, "Support the Johnsons," "No place for hate," "Listen to our students," and concerned citizens from Cedar Ridge and neighboring towns. Folding chairs crammed the floor, facing a makeshift stage where the school board members sat alongside Principal Hayes, looking distinctly uncomfortable under the glare of the portable TV lights. This was the emergency town hall meeting, prompted not by the school administration's initiative, but by the relentless pressure cooker of viral videos, national news headlines, and an avalanche of emails and calls demanding accountability. Zara and Malik sat in the front row with Imani between them. Imani, dressed in a simple but elegant purple dress, radiated a quiet strength that seemed to fill the space around her. The twins, dressed neatly, projected a calm composure, though Zara occasionally flexed her hands in her lap, and Malik's gaze scanned the room, taking in every detail. Further back, Jake Henderson and Derek Peterson sat stiffly between their parents. Jake's father, a man whose tailored suit couldn't quite conceal his simmering resentment, stared straight ahead. Sheriff Peterson, in uniform, looked grim, his face unreadable. The boys themselves kept their eyes downcast, avoiding the curious and sometimes hostile glances thrown their way. The viral fame had brought swift, unwelcome consequences: suspension from school, removal from the football team pending investigation, and the harsh glare of public condemnation. After opening remarks filled with platitudes about community and understanding from the school board president, the floor was open for public comment. Ms. Alvarez was one of the first to the microphone, her voice clear and steady despite the tremor in her hands. For weeks, she began, addressing the board directly, Zara and Malik Johnson tried to navigate a hostile environment. They reported harassment. They reported intimidation. They reported hate speech. They were told it was teen drama. They were told to fit in. They were ignored. Her voice rose slightly. It took a violent confrontation, captured on video and broadcast to the world, for this administration, for this town, to finally acknowledge the racism festering within these walls. Applause rippled through the sympathetic sections of the crowd. Ms. Alvarez continued, outlining the pattern of microaggressions and overt acts the twins had endured, referencing the documentation she had helped them keep. She then pivoted. But this isn't just about punishment. It's about prevention. It's about education. She gestured towards a small group standing near the stage. Thanks to the incredible outpouring of support online, donations flooding in from across the country from people moved by the Johnsons' courage, we have the initial funding to implement a comprehensive anti-racism curriculum. One developed by experts, tailored for our community, designed to foster empathy, understanding, and accountability. She laid a thick binder on the podium. We need the board's commitment to see this through, to make Cedar Ridge a place where all students feel safe and respected. More applause, louder this time. Several board members scribbled notes, their expressions shifting from defensive to thoughtful. Then, Imani Johnson approached the microphone. A hush fell over the gym. She stood tall, her gaze sweeping across the crowd, pausing for a moment on Jake and Derek's families before settling on the school board. "My name is Imani Johnson," she said, her voice resonating with quiet power. "My husband, David Johnson, was killed during a traffic stop because the officers saw his black skin and assumed aggression. We moved here from Detroit, seeking safety, seeking opportunity, seeking a place to heal. Instead, My children faced hatred, violence, and indifference. Her voice remained steady, but her words carried the weight of generations of pain and resilience. My children are disciplined. They are respectful. They are 16 years old. They also happen to be black belts in martial arts, a skill their father taught them, hoping it would give them confidence, discipline, and a means of self-defense in a world he knew could be dangerous for them. She paused, letting the words sink in. I am proud of their restraint. I am proud of their courage. But my children shouldn't need black belts to walk down a school hallway without being harassed. They shouldn't need martial arts skills to earn basic respect and safety. They shouldn't have to defend themselves against racial slurs and threats of violence in a place that's supposed to nurture their growth. Her gaze was unwavering. What happened on that football field wasn't a victory. It was a failure. A failure of this school, of this community, to protect its children. All its children. We don't need more silence. We don't need more excuses. We need change. Real change. Starting now. Imani returned to her seat amidst stunned silence, followed by a wave of heartfelt, sustained applause. Her raw honesty had cut through the noise, laying bare the core issue. Malik spoke next, not with anger, but with quiet intensity. He didn't recount the attacks. Instead, he held up his sketchbook, open to a fresh page. I use art to process things, he said softly, his voice amplified by the microphone. He slowly turned the pages, showing drawings, a sketch of their father, smiling, a rendering of the "Welcome to Cedar Ridge" sign, but with shadows creeping in from the edges, the defaced locker door, drawn from memory, a powerful image of two figures standing back to back, deflecting blows. This town has a history. Like everywhere. Some of it is good. Some of it involves ignoring uncomfortable truths. We can't erase the past, but we can draw a different future. Zara followed him. She didn't speak at length. Instead, she stood tall and demonstrated a simple defensive stance, feet planted, hands raised protectively, eyes focused. What we did wasn't about violence, she stated clearly. It was about survival. Self-defense is a right. Knowing how to protect yourself, how to de-escalate if possible, how to neutralize a threat if necessary, that's not aggression. It's asserting your right to exist without fear. She lowered her hands. We shouldn't have had to use it. But we were prepared. The meeting continued for another hour, filled with impassioned pleas, defensive statements, and promises of action from the chastened school board. The tide, it seemed, had turned. The viral videos hadn't just shamed the bullies, they had forced the entire community to confront an ugly reality it had long preferred to ignore. As the crowd began to disperse, a hesitant figure approached the Johnsons. It was Jake Henderson, minus his usual swagger, his parents hovering awkwardly a few feet away. His eyes were fixed on the floor. He stammered, looking quickly at Zara and Malik, then away again. Look, what we did, it was messed up. Really messed up. He swallowed hard. My dad, he's in some group online. Says all this stuff, about heritage, about replacement. I heard it my whole life. I guess. I didn't think. Think now, Zara interrupted, her voice quiet but firm, cutting through his fumbling excuses. She met his gaze, holding it until he looked away again. Think about the hate you absorbed, the hate you spread. Think about the fear you caused. Think about what happens when that hate isn't stopped by a warning kick. Her eyes were cold fire. Think hard, Jake. Because you got off easy this time. Next time, it might not be us you have to answer to. It might be someone who doesn't know how to hold back. Or it might be the consequences of the world you're helping to build. Jake flinched as if struck. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Without another word, he turned and walked quickly away, his parents trailing behind him, their faces masks of strained composure. Watching him go, Malik felt a complex mix of emotions, contempt, pity, weariness. Change was messy. Accountability was painful. But maybe, just maybe, the echoes of this night, of their stand, could ripple outwards, creating cracks in the foundations of hate, allowing a little light to seep through. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time since arriving in Cedar Ridge, it felt like they weren't fighting entirely alone. Detroit, Michigan, 2024. The scent in the air wasn't manure or damp earth. It was the familiar, comforting blend of old wood, sweat, and the faint aroma of jasmine incense. Sunlight streamed through the newly washed windows of the storefront, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and glinting off the polished wooden floor. This wasn't their old basement dojo, but it held the same spirit. Johnson Community Dojo, strength, discipline, respect. The lettering on the door was bold and clear. Inside, Zara, now 22, adjusted a framed photograph on the wall. It was the same picture from their makeshift altar in Cedar Ridge, their father, smiling, holding them as children. Beside it hung several laminated newspaper clippings and printouts of online articles. Cedar Ridge twins spark national dialogue on racism in schools. Ohio town implements anti-hate curriculum after viral incident. From victims to advocates, the Johnson twins' journey. Malik, equally tall but broader now, swept the floor near the entrance, his movements economical and precise. They had returned to Detroit 2 years after the Cedar Ridge incident, after finishing high school there under a vastly different, though still imperfect, climate. Imani had transferred back to a Detroit hospital, wanting to be home. Cedar Ridge had changed them, hardened them in some ways, but it had also clarified their purpose. Using the settlement money from a civil suit against the school district, settled quietly out of court, and the remaining funds from the national outpouring of support, they had poured everything into creating this space in their old neighborhood, a place of empowerment, discipline, and community. The dojo offered free introductory classes for local kids, self-defense workshops for women, and traditional martial arts training rooted in the philosophy their father had instilled in them. It was rapidly becoming a neighborhood hub, a place where kids could find focus, adults could find strength, and everyone could find respect. The bell over the door chimed, announcing a visitor. A young man, maybe 17 or 18, stood hesitantly in the doorway. He was white, with anxious eyes and clothes that looked slightly out of place, clean-cut, suburban. He clutched a worn duffel bag, his knuckles white. "Excuse me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Is this the Johnson dojo?" Malik leaned his broom against the wall. "It is. Can we help you?" The young man took a deep breath, his gaze darting nervously between Malik and Zara, who had turned from adjusting the photo. "My name is Kevin. I drove down from Ohio. From near Cedar Ridge." Zara and Malik exchanged a quick glance. Cedar Ridge. The name still carried a complex weight. Kevin shifted his weight, looking down at his sneakers. "I saw the news reports back then. About what happened at the high school. With you guys." He looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of shame and earnestness. "I was one of the kids, in the crowd. On the field that day. I didn't do anything. I just watched. And recorded." He swallowed hard. "Later, I saw the other videos, the stuff Jake and his friends were doing before, the things people said online. My friends, some of them, they thought it was funny, or that you guys deserved it." He paused, struggling for words. "But it wasn't right. What happened to you? What they did. And seeing you guys, how you handled it, how you stood up without just beating them senseless, even though you could have." He trailed off, then rushed on. "It made me think. A lot. About things I never thought about before. About what my friends say, what I hear at home sometimes." He looked directly at Malik, then Zara. "I want to learn," he said, his voice trembling slightly but firm. Not just the fighting stuff. But the other part. The discipline. The respect. How to be better. How to stand up, maybe. Not just watch." Silence settled in the dojo, broken only by the distant sounds of city traffic. Zara studied the young man, seeing past the nervousness to the genuine conflict in his eyes. Malik stepped forward, his expression serious but not unkind. He nodded slowly. "All right, Kevin from Ohio. Welcome." He gestured towards the training floor. "Put your bag down. First lesson starts now. Kevin looked surprised, then relieved, a tentative smile touching his lips. Malik met his gaze. First lesson, respect isn't earned with fists. You don't beat it into someone, and you don't fight to demand it. He paused, his eyes drifting towards the photo of his father, then back to Kevin. But sometimes, when respect is denied, when dignity is attacked, when hate tries to silence you, sometimes, fists, controlled, disciplined, defensive, are necessary to remind others they need to earn yours. He clapped his hands together, the sound sharp and clear in the sunlit room. Now, let's begin with breathing. Zara watched them, a sense of profound, weary hope settling within her. The fight was far from over. The shadows of Cedar Ridge stretched long, touching countless towns, countless lives. But here, in the heart of their reclaimed home, under the watchful gaze of their father's photograph, they were building something. A sanctuary. A training ground. A small beacon of light against the darkness. In the dojo of life, the strongest strikes are those that break chains, not bones.